Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome.
Just going to give about 30 seconds or so for everyone to get logged in because we do appreciate some of you are joining on your lunch break. So we want to try and keep to the hour, the time that we set out to start. All right, Siobhan, are you ready to go?
I'm ready when you are.
Great. Okay, so again, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Navigating PIPA, a webinar that we've put together with BEDC to be able to help organizations prepare for Bermuda's Personal Information Protection Act. During this webinar, we're going to run through a few key things that can help your business prepare. But before we get started, I think we should introduce ourselves. My name is Tahira Lovell. I'm the CEO of the TLC Group of Companies, and I am excited to be joined by my co-founder. We founded TLC Group back in 2018, so we're coming up on 6 years. Siobhan Clark-Joe, who's our CDO. Siobhan did take a quick break with us, but she is now back. And Siobhan, do you want to maybe tell people a little bit about what you've done and what you're looking to do with us for TLC going forward?
Sure, absolutely. For those of you wondering what CDO is Chief Disruption Officer. And so I like to say, especially, I guess, coming from Bermuda, if you think about waves and how waves come at Horseshoe Bay, we like to jump in the waves. Some of us let it crash on us, and some of us aren't paying attention, and it can knock us off balance. And so I like to think of my role as both the good and the bad of disruption, because disruption happens with any type, I'm sorry, with change, disruption happens. It can be good disruption, sometimes it's bad, but it's also about navigating through those experiences and being able to take care of self and be resilient and agile through the whole experience. So really excited to be back with TLC in this capacity. I have, of course, moved. Hi, sorry. I've moved into data protection and artificial intelligence, ethics and governance. So it's exciting to now bring some of that, so a more holistic view of where data protection is going, where cybersecurity is going, and how emerging technologies will shake up or disrupt our businesses and our entire island and ourselves as individuals. So excited to be here, excited to be back to support with PIPA, and looking forward to this session.
Great. Thanks, Siobhan. And for some of you, you may be familiar with the TLC group. We've done a number of information sessions over the years in Bermuda. But just a few key points. We really champion organizations adopting what we call by design and default. And what that means is, as you're looking at your PIPA program, whether you've already started or you've got something in place, how can we embed it into the organization to ensure, as Siobhan said, that you have a holistic view of data protection. We are an accredited organization. We offer a whole suite of solutions, whether it's training or direct consulting for our clients. And just a few housekeeping notes. We do appreciate there's a number of you here. We will ask that you can keep questions to the end. We do have some time for questions, so you can drop them in the chat, and we'll endeavor to answer as many of them as we can. Please be aware, you would have seen when you signed in, this session is being recorded and will be available for replay for the public. So we do ask that you keep your questions to a general nature, nothing that may be personal or company specific. And again, this is sort of a well-rounded view of our outlook on how you can get PIPA ready, but some of the opinions or some of the guidance that we may express may not be applicable in all situations. So we do suggest you, of course, defer to those in your organization who are responsible for PIPA. And if it's yourself and you still have questions, feel free to get in contact with us. So Today, we're going to look at a PIPA overview. We'll be looking at, we have our SSA framework. And again, we've talked about this. Some of you may be familiar with it. And that's our sense, shape, and adapt. And this is the way that TLC approaches a simplified way and a structured process to get your organization ready for PIPA specifically, but for protecting personal data generally. So as we go through the presentation today, we'll detail how each of these phases can help contribute to making your organization PIPA compliant. So I'm going to pass it over to Siobhan to take us through some of the key aspects of PIPA.
Yes, thank you, Tahira. So, Tahira, when we started in 2018, of course, the story is that I returned back to Bermuda, and we were so sure that the next step would be consulting around PIPA because we knew that PIPA was coming. During that time, we learned very quickly that there was lots of work to be done, and there's still work to be done. It was a time before PriveCom had opened. And so this is the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, and the two lovely people on the screen. We've got the Privacy Commissioner, Alexander White, and the Deputy Commissioner, Angie Farquharson. And they, as well as their team, they provide lots of high-level guidance and support for the public, for the community. There's lots of resources on their website as well, Guide to PIPA, to help to simplify and understand parts of the legislation. And so PIPA, it can be, some people call it PIPA, some call it PIPA, right? But it stands for Bermuda's Personal Information Protection Act. And it's something that we should all be proud of because around the world, we're seeing data protection regulations and laws popping up. And we have one that is dedicated to Bermuda and to individuals in Bermuda. It applies to all organizations, and that is organizations in or outside of Bermuda that use personal information belonging to individuals in Bermuda, regardless of the size. So it can be an entrepreneur or it can be a conglomerate. It doesn't matter. We must still be in compliance with PIPA. And this includes, of course, again, public, private, so businesses, government entities, nonprofit organizations, all the same. There are parts of PIPA that are already enacted. One is the development of the office. That is in the legislation, as well as the powers of the commissioner and his team and the operations of the office. Again, you can find lots of resources, and I believe that what's really important in this space is to be resourceful because there's so much change that happens in a rapid pace. And so you can visit privacy.bm to access lots of resources and guides, and of course, to speak with the Privacy Commissioner's team. So let's tuck into a few key aspects of PIPA. One is scope, and scope is already enacted. And so it's what does PIPA cover? And so it includes public and private sector organizations operating in Bermuda. And operating, that means that even an overseas entity that has a partnership with a Bermudian entity or an overseas entity that may be operating in Bermuda in any way, if they are collecting personal information, they have to still be in compliance with PIPA. Now, the scope covers collection, use, disclosure, retention, disposal. What we call this is the entire data lifecycle. So every aspect of data, from data management, from collection to getting rid of it, the entity or the organization is still responsible for it under PIPA. Now, in Bermuda, of course, we don't call individuals data subjects. That is more the UK and Europe and some other jurisdictions. But PIPA does speak to individuals. And what's great about it, it gives individuals rights. And so it means that you will have the right to request access to your information. And organizations will need to have steps in place to reply in a timely manner. Now, obviously, people get access to their information. They may want to do some other things with it. One may be they want to object or block some of the use of that information. They may want to correct it, or maybe something's missing, so omission, and they want to add something to it. Their phone number isn't there, so they want to make sure that that's added. Or they may even try to have it erased or destroyed if they do not understand why it's still in the use of that organization. What's important to remember is that privacy rights are not absolute. And so there are conditions, or under GDPR, lawful bases, reasons why an entity may deny someone's individual rights. So PIPA calls for a privacy representative. It gives an example of privacy officer. So we kind of use that as a key area that all organizations must have a privacy representative, but a privacy officer, typically they will have certain skills, and they'll be looking to build what I call a toolbox or a bag, which is skills and strengths that they can support the organization. So PIPA only calls for an individual that can be the first point of contact with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. But the reality is many organizations, they don't have a privacy program in place. They have not looked at lots of their processes and the operation of the business with the lens of data privacy. And so to be fair, they will need to develop a privacy program. And so a privacy officer typically will help to develop those things as well. But at the very minimum, you need to at least have one person that will be the point of contact with PriveCom.
And Siobhan, if you could just talk about whether that needs to be an internal person or can they outsource? You want to just
Absolutely.
speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Very good point, Tahira. So, of course, there are options. You can outsource that role. And if you have a business that has many, you have many businesses under one umbrella, so to speak, or one main company, you can have that privacy officer serve numerous entities, if that makes sense. You can also hire an entity to serve as your privacy officer, or hire an individual to do so. So there are flexibility in the way that you can appoint someone. Of course, you may also need to train the team members if they will be appointed to do the work of a privacy officer, especially if they will be developing those programs. And of course, we'll talk about some of that today. Data breach notification. Now you see risk there, particularly when there are high risks to individuals. You have to report a data breach to the Privacy Commissioner. You also have to advise the affected individuals. Now, sometimes PriveCom may give guidance around how to advise individuals, or they may even advise on putting the notification in the press, in the public, in the public, so that enough people who may be affected, they are aware. And so we must be mindful of the fact that this notification must be acknowledged, must be taken care of without undue delay. So when you find out, you now need to be mindful and start taking steps to inform the Privacy Commissioner's office. And then overseas data transfers. This is a big one as well. The reason why is because PIPA is quite specific that the local entity, the entity in Bermuda, will be the one responsible and accountable if there is a breach with an overseas entity that they're doing business with. And so when it comes to your relationships with overseas entities, it's very important to make sure that there is at least a PIPA level of compliance in place with that entity, as well as that you're being mindful of how they manage information. The transfer of personal information outside of Bermuda requires adequate safeguards. Continuing on here, accountability. Now, accountability, again, a big one, because accountability sits with the organization. Yes, you appoint the privacy officer, and they are responsible for communicating with the Privacy Commissioner. You may also have responsibilities like developing your program, but still the accountability falls with the organization. So it's very important to make sure that that officer has tools and resources so that they can manage the privacy program, as well as make sure that training is in place and that you are mindful of those policies and procedures. Again, the accountability falls with the organization, but it also trickles to individuals. And so individuals must also, as far as, I'm sorry, I should say employees, not individuals. So employees are responsible as well for certain aspects of data privacy, but data protection in general. And so in addition to that, there's the requirement for record keeping. And so no, PIPA does not state that you have to present your records immediately to the Privacy Commissioner's office. But if there's a data breach, you may need to bring it out so that they can review it, particularly if the Assistant Commissioner of Investigations, Christopher Mulder, needs to conduct an investigation. He may need to look at your processing activities. So keeping those updated is very, very important under PIPA. In addition to that, the security measures. These are all things that help to protect the data that you're collecting. So you must make sure that you've got appropriate security measures in place to protect the information. Penalties and enforcements, never an exciting conversation, but is another important point. So, of course, there are penalties with PIPA. It can be everything from an investigation to public admonishment to fines. And so PIPA for individuals, and this is again why it's important, I believe that every organization has a duty of care to make sure that individuals know what their liabilities are, right? So up to $25,000 and or imprisonment for an individual if they are found to have compromised areas of PIPA and jeopardize people's information. And an organization can see up to $250,000. Now, of course, for a small business, and even for a large one, I mean, who wants to give away $250,000? But for some entities, this is quite serious. So my analogy with the wave is very important. You can stand and wait for it to come your way. You can kind of jump in it or swim through it. Or you could turn a blind eye and be hit by a wave that might be coming your way. January 1st, of course, PIPA comes into full enforcement. And so it's very important that you make sure that you've got your compliance in place. And remember that even individuals can make complaints. In the UK, Tahira may remember this, when GDPR first came into enforcement, the number of employees that were complaining about their organization. Now, you would think that they wouldn't, but they can do so, and they do. And so making sure that you've got these measures in place, you've got your processes and policies in place are very important, not just for the penalties and enforcement, but to make sure that your staff feel safe. So how might PIPA impact your organization? Of course, I've talked about a few things already, but now let's talk about, well, let's drive it home and talk about a few additional ones. So one is you will likely have to look at your data protection measures. But for those of you who do not have robust data protection measures in place, you will need to look at some new ones. It may be new software that help you to manage this. It may be software that helps you to identify data. Where is the data in your organization? It could be the development of new policies or revising policies. It could even be changes to who has access to certain data. And so it's important to understand, to kind of gauge where you are with your organization right now and where you need to go next in terms of developing your program. Additional roles. So for some, it may be a change of their role. Maybe now they are appointed privacy officer, and it's not just privacy officer. There are other roles you can consider to really make sure that your organization is secure. You can consider privacy leads for managers of different departments. It might be privacy champions, cybersecurity champions across your organization in different departments to help to have their ear to the ground and keep you informed of any risk, as well as remind your team of what their responsibilities are. Because again, It's everyone's responsibility. You may be hiring someone to come in and do that piece of work. You don't have to hire a full-time privacy officer, but you do need to have someone that can manage this on your behalf. Or you may hire an organization that may come in short time to support, but then they have to hand it over. So that means that you still have to train someone in a role to manage the responsibilities of data protection. It will likely change. And remember, we started off talking about disruption. Well, it will disrupt your business, the way you work and the way you communicate. So how you communicate with customers and staff is going to be very important, from your policy. And that could be a notice on your website, and that's a best practice. It could be as well in how you explain, again, how you train your staff on what their responsibilities are, and even the rights that you allow people to have. It seems easy to not give people rights, but let's remember that each of us are individuals outside of our work. Would we not want to have access to our data? Would we not want to know what's happening with our data? Of course, for most of us, the answer would be no. We want some level of control, right? And so we really have to think about what we are allowing our staff and customers to have access to, and how they can protect themselves, and how we would like that to happen. I call it the art of reciprocity. Greater due diligence. So again, when we're now talking about anyone who is not employed at our organization, well, they bring risk. Am I correct, Tahira? Everyone that we bring into our business can bring risk, whether they are consultants, businesses that you partner with, they will bring something. But what's important here in this point is, when you are doing business with anyone outside of your organization, which may likely be a data sharing partner or a supply chain vendor, you must be careful of making sure that those protections are in place. So reviewing those data processing and data sharing agreements, making sure that they will be responsive if you have a data breach, making sure that they have robust security in place. Because remember, your business, if you're local in Bermuda, will be the business accountable if that third party or that overseas entity has a data breach. And so you must, of course, make sure, and it doesn't make a difference who they are. We've seen big name companies, Facebook, Google, big names, Microsoft, all sorts of entities can have a breach, because of, as Tahira always says, is not if, it's when. It can happen at any point, right? And so even if you have the most robust program, you could always, there will always be gaps. There will always be areas where there could be a weakness, and so, or vulnerability. So due diligence around who you share information with, who you do business with. Maybe you don't renew some of those contracts if they don't enhance their data protection activities. Now, how might PIPA impact you? Again, individuals, you as a person, whether you're the CEO, CFO, it doesn't make a difference. The role, you are an individual, right? And so whether it's you being mindful of these things for yourself with other businesses, or as the employee of an organization, these are the things that you need to be aware of. Well, one, again, you will need to be aware that there will be updated policies, procedures, and you will need to follow them. You will need to protect yourself, because these things are changing. It's the same with data security. There are best practices that your entity should be reminding you of if you're the leader of the entity, or you're in a role where you would be part of the data protection team, really making sure that the training, the awareness is in place, so that team members are reminded of those best practices. The role of reporting things that are wrong, the risks that you might see, concerns that you might have, those things. Your brother's keeper? Well, it's real. We are our brother's keeper when it comes to data protection. Again, keep in mind that you would want someone to raise alarm bells if your data was being compromised. Well, everyone's job, it is everyone's responsibility to report concerns. If there's something wrong, we should speak up so that it can be addressed. So the important point here, if the next point is that data protection, PIPA compliance, data security, it's a collaborative effort. Everyone's responsible for it. And so we must make sure that we've got the training, we've got the tools, we've got the procedures, and that we're being inclusive in the way that we are preparing our teams to manage these types of data protection situations. So I will pass it over to Tahira to take us through the SSA framework and how it applies to PIPA.
Thank you, Siobhan. So some of you, based on what Siobhan shared, may be sitting there wondering, oh my goodness. Some of you may say, oh, well, we're quite far along. And others may say, there may be one or two things that we need to, get together, but we're pretty much prepared. What we have found over the last 5 or 6 years working with not just Bermuda entities, but just any entity that's trying to get prepared and, meet data protection legislations is it's a lot. How do we do this? How do we break it down? So we developed our SSA framework, and it's really something we use internally as well with our clients to help simplify complex challenges. The SSA, it's really about helping to break down and solve any of those issues. So we'll take a few moments to go through that. As you see, we're coming up to about the half-hour mark. Again, for those of you who may not have seen or heard the housekeeping, we will have some chat at the end where you can ask some questions, okay? So we will go through the SSA, give you some solutions, right? We want you to come away feeling like you've got something to do, a next step that you feel prepared to get your organization compliant. So the SSA framework, this is a visual for those of you who are much more visual than readers. It's really designed to break it down. So you're not doing everything at once. You're sort of moving through structured phases of compliance. It also helps you to prioritize. As you can see visually, the blue bubble, the sense, that's what Siobhan said, where she was saying about knowing where you are now. That's what sense is all about. And quite often, that's what we call the heavy lift area. Because again, how can you protect what you don't know you have? So the sense we'll go through shortly. Shaping, again, is around looking at what you're going to be implementing in the organization once you've identified any gaps and vulnerabilities, and then the adapt phase. And the adapt phase is the phase, I must admit, that's a bit I love because it's really about once you're compliant, what do you do? Because this is not just something you just tick a box, okay, we're compliant, and we walk away. Environments change. Siobhan's doing AI and all sorts of great things with different entities. There's things that are changing all the time. Disruption. So really the adapt piece is about preparing your organization to remain PIPA compliant, not just for today, but also tomorrow. So the sense phase, again, is about understanding the PIPA requirements. One of the first things you want to do is actually familiarize yourself with PIPA. As Siobhan said, there's privacy.bm. There's a lot of guidance, information up there. The act itself is not a lengthy read. So if you wanted to go through that, because again, you want to understand if you're even, what scope that you may, have to comply, because there are what we call, some areas where you may not have to have, sorry, Siobhan, help me there. I forgot the term that's in the act.
Exemptions or exclusions?
Exemptions. Thank you, Siobhan. See, we work together so well. But there are some areas of exemptions in the act. So depending what type of organization you are, what type of data processing you're doing, there may be some exemptions. So again, first step, understand those requirements and how they apply to your organization. You also want to get a budget. Of course, we do consultancy and training, and a lot of people come to us and say, well, how much is this going to cost, right? What is this going to require for us to become compliant? You really need to understand what are those financial resources that you have, because there's no one size fits all solution, and there's various ranges. You can Some people are very good at going online, getting templates, following the road to PIPA, which is a free resource that the Privacy Commissioner's Office program that they've got running. You can employ consultants, you can hire. So there's all these different ways that you can get your PIPA program in place. But you really need to understand who you have internally, where there may be gaps, where you need external support, and you may have to look at outsourcing some of that. And also prioritizing the task. Because if you have a limited budget, you may have to look at those really sort of high priority areas and get those in place first before looking at some of the others. Review your existing data protection practices. Many of you already have some data protection going on. I mean, there's most organizations, they have filing systems where only certain people have access to them. Most organizations have usernames and passwords to access different systems. So again, you may have things already in place, but you need to review them and see, what policies, what safeguards do we currently have? Because that will then enable you to say, okay, well, where are the gaps? Siobhan mentioned the individual rights. I would, and Siobhan, correct me if you don't share the same sentiment, but I would say prioritizing your individual rights management, because again, that's sort of what we call the public face of your organization, is how you're dealing with customers or employees, any individuals whose personal data you're collecting. So looking at, a lot of organizations may not have that, but I would say if you are looking at tasks to prioritize, that's definitely one of them that I would say you want to look at as well. Identify the activities. As Siobhan mentioned in the overview when we first started, it's really from the point of collection all the way to disposal. So that's, you store it, you share it, your retention, you need to identify what types of data. PIPA talks about sensitive data. Again, these all of these terms that we're referring to, if you go onto the privacy.bm website, download the act, you can go ahead and have a look through those, because there are certain categories of data that you need to be extremely careful and aware of. Purpose, Siobhan mentioned, and lawfulness. There are conditions or reasons that PIPA allows organizations to process personal data. And then retention, looking at how long you're actually keeping people's personal data. And then any of those third-party transfers, data sharing, cross-border, so with overseas entities. And sometimes organizations say, well, we don't send anything overseas. And then I'll be like, do you use Google? Do you use Microsoft Cloud Services? These are very rarely hosted in Bermuda. Most technology platforms, software that we use are overseas. So even though you're in Bermuda using the system, the data is not in Bermuda. So you need to be aware of that with those entities. And as Siobhan said, ultimately, it's the organization. You can't sort of just say, oh, well, it was their fault, it was their problem. No, it is your organization's responsibility. And then finally, when we're talking about responsibilities, is the data protection, looking at what compliance structure best fits your needs. So if you're a small, you may be a solopreneur, it's only yourself in the organization. You may say, well, I'm busy making my candles, I don't have time to deal with PIPA, so I'm going to either work with another entity, we will share resources, or I may just look to outsource it completely. If you're a medium or larger organization where you may have different departments, you may look and say, as Siobhan said, well, we can implement, the role of data protection into various people's job descriptions to be able to help the organization ensure that everyone is aware of the legislation and the needs. And then again, that privacy representative. It can be an internal person, it can be an external person, it could be an external organization. But ultimately, that is one of the key requirements of the Act. So I'll pass it over to Siobhan to take you through SHAPE.
Okay, so of course, thank you, Tahira. You did such a wonderful job with that. And the thing about sense is we have to take an honest look, honest reflection of where we are. When we talk about the budget, where are you, as you mentioned? If you don't have a big budget, what can you do? And this is where shape comes in. One, identifying and recognizing where you are, and then the next step is to mold it like Play-Doh, if you wish, to what you need, tailoring it to your needs. And so in the shape, it's about developing your compliance roadmap. And this is a step-by-step plan. Again, for some entities, they may be further along. Maybe because they have to be in so many other, they have to be in compliance with so many other laws and regulations that they are already maybe 50% there. And so it's about wrapping their compliance around PIPA now and really understanding how it will impact what they already have in place. So that will look very different to an entity who has not started, or a small business, or a mom and pop shop, or an entrepreneur. But we still have to do this work. So it's really a matter of having that honest look and putting aside what is the budget so you know where you're starting. So sense is like the starting point. We're in shape now where we also need to think about what controls we have in place. What controls do we need? How are things going to change? What's going to happen in our near future that may impact the controls we need to have? I think of the Home Depot case in February, Tahira, with Google Cloud and the AI system, and how it was collecting information from customer service and putting it on the cloud, on the Google Cloud. And so there were concerns and, of course, lots of backlash around that for Home Depot. Imagine a local entity, as Tahira mentioned, many local entities would be using ChatGPT. They would be using different tools that are not created in Bermuda. So understanding what you're using, how you're using it, and what controls you need to have in place are important. So whether that's technical, as it says on the slide, in terms of encryption, or even the more operational or administrative controls, like updating policies, or who has access to certain types of information. These are all controls that we'll need to create, and they will be different depending on the entity. And then, of course,
Sorry, if I could just jump in
of
here really
course,
quickly. I mentioned in the sense which where we talked about identifying like data types,
yes.
identifying, who you're sharing information with and things like that. In the control or in the shape area,
Mhm.
can you just maybe touch on what that would look like as a data inventory, or the type of tool that you
Mhm.
possibly use to make sure that that's in place?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. There are a number of types of controls as we've discussed, but a nice progression from what you've done in the sense stage would be to put in those inventories. It may be a matter of developing your own assessment that can help you to identify and identify the gaps so that you have a plan to shape your organization. And so, yes, there are a number of checklists or tools that you may need to consider. Some you may develop, some exist already, and then you may wish to have some of them tailored to your organization. So if you don't have those skills, there are consultants and entities that can develop an assessment just for your organization.
Thank you.
And training employees. And I'll go as far as training and awareness, right? So in the shape, it is more about the training. You're creating policies, you're creating new procedures. So I often say most entities, they have like tons of them. I mean, the larger the entity, the legacy, the older the entity, they might have hundreds of policies. And the CEO does not know everything in those policies. And the reason why is because we're human, right? And so training is how we make sure that people understand the key areas that we need them to pay attention to when it comes to this area, especially awareness to make sure that they are reminded of what your expectations are when it comes to compliance in the organization. And then lastly, in SHAPE is documenting and maintaining those records. I talked earlier about records of processing. Of course, keeping it updated is very, very important. At any point, you may be called to present it to the Privacy Commissioner's office, or it may be an incident, a cross-border incident, where it may be something outside of Bermuda, and the authority is requesting to have an understanding of how you process the records of individuals in their jurisdiction. You never know what type of complexity could come your way with data protection. And so being prepared with a record and keeping it updated is a very, very important step and a best practice. I'm going to pass it over to Tahira. And like she said, she loves this part because it's all about resilience and agility. Over to you, Tahira.
Thanks, Siobhan. Compliance isn't a one-time task. We have organizations that when we first started providing services in Bermuda that are still with us to today. And again, they are much farther along. Most of them are now firmly in the adapt phase. And this is really around, how can we improve? How can we ensure long-term compliance? Because again, as Siobhan said, change happens. It's guaranteed, right? So this is looking at how you can ensure that as PIPA, the act itself may change. Right now, we have the 2016, there's been some amendments last year, but we may find as time goes on that additional things, additional requirements are added to the act. So the adapt phase is really for organizations to be able to navigate and manage that. So the first one is, that budget. Again, budget isn't necessarily also all about money. It's looking at all of those resources, people, because again, if we're talking about giving people additional responsibilities, how are they going to manage that possibly alongside their existing role? Especially if you're a smaller entity, you may find that, you may need to look at, again, maybe sharing a privacy consultant or look at ways that you can use some of those free resources. Because again, you don't want to spend all of the money or all of your budget up front, and then you don't have anything to maintain it in the long run. Change management, all of the buzzwords, agility, looking at being proactive, to ensure that you're managing personal information under evolving conditions. And change management is around assessing impact. If you find that you're getting, I would say in the UK, when GDPR came into existence, there were loads of people exercising their individual or data subject rights. Bermuda, and I think largely that was because it was free. So people were like, well, why don't I just go ahead and, see what people, what organizations have about me. Bermuda does allow organizations to charge a fee. Again, if you do decide to charge, as an organization, decide to charge a fee, you need to ensure that it does not deter people from, again, exercising their rights, right? So you don't want to, put in a fee that stops people or deters them from actually doing that request. Testing and rolling out changes. So as Siobhan mentioned in that the shape phase, you're going to be putting controls in place. Over time, you may find that you need a new software, or you may need to change a procedure or a process of handling personal data. You want to test that and see, maybe try one department or try one particular data processing activity and see, what impact does that have on the organization? And again, making sure that your documentation stays updated. There's nothing worse than going to, you put your data inventory in place and, you spent all this time putting it in place. And then 2 years later, that data inventory has no relevance. It doesn't look at all how your organization's processing data. So again, it's really important to keep those documents updated, policies, procedures, data flow maps. And then also, as training employees in the SHAPE section, you want to provide that ongoing support. That could be Q&A sessions, lunch and learns that you do internally, or if you're in larger organization or you process really high risk information, you may need to look at having someone dedicated to be able to support the rest of the team members with PIPA compliance. And then you want to conduct regular assessments. Over time, again, your environment may change. You may get new staff. You may start offering new products, new services. You may merge with another entity and have new partnerships. So, getting those internal audits, those checklists, we um, suggest at a minimum annually you should be reviewing your PIPA program. Again, if if you're processing high volume data that changes a lot, or you have a very dynamic environment, you may want to look at a shorter time frame. But at a minimum, you should be doing some sort of review on an annual basis, and ensuring that you're remediating or fixing any of those gaps or issues that are identified. And then finally, the ongoing monitoring, staying updated. As I said, PIPA may change. Make sure you bookmark privacy.bm, sign up for any newsletters, or any webinars and seminars. It's great that you're here for the BEDC one. Again, there's lots of entities that are putting on different information sessions to be able to support you. And then thinking about, compliance. How are you going to, what metric are you going to use? Key performance indicators to track your compliance program. Because again, at the beginning, you may be, it may take you 30 days to respond to a data individual's request for access. But you may say, okay, well, we want to shoot for 20. Just again, you can look at refining some of that processing that you're doing, and also monitoring third parties. It's really important to keep track of what's happening with the third parties. We've had clients who said, oh, yes, we had our data processing agreement. We did it in 2021. We're now in 2024, and they realized that that entity got bought out, especially in technology and software. Quite often they're bought out by other entities. What does that landscape now look when it comes to data protection? So again, we hope that you seeing it laid out in that way has helped you, but we do have just a few more benefits to talk about that the SSA can support organizations with PIPA compliance.
Yeah, so I'll pick up from here. So the SSA, again, when we think about, there's so many questions around, well, how do I do this? How do I make it work? How do I manage all of this? And that is a key area that we wanted to address, to provide a way to approach this change that is inevitable. And so, as Tahira mentioned before, the great thing about this framework is I like to say, bite-sized chunks. If it's too much, it's overwhelming, then you could just focus on the sense area, because it's important for you to keep your finger on the pulse with the rapidly evolving nature of this space. Again, I've touched on a little bit of, ChatGPT, AI types of things, but that is a reality. Around the world, they are looking into this, they're developing it. Bermuda is part of the world, and we love to be current with things that are changing and developing globally. And so as you think about how things are going to change in your industry, in your organization, it's important for you to sense when those changes are coming, or when you need to get moving, to shape what that's going to look like for your entity, what's realistic based on jurisdiction, based on culture, based on many different things, even based, as Tahira mentioned, on the resources, not just the finance, the team. What type of talent do you have? What type of, capabilities, or capacity, that's what I was trying to say. Capacity can you handle or manage? And so shaping is very important. Sensing, like putting your ear to the ground, paying attention, finger on the pulse, shaping, and then adapting. That's the long view. That's how you get past the wave and past PIPA January 1st, because January 2 is coming too, right? And so you have to be able to manage it. It's very risky to put a program in place like this and not have the resources to keep managing it. That alone would put your organization at a high risk. And so it's very important that you do consider the long-term impacts on the budget, on the resources, and on the way that you intend to manage it. So again, you can look at this through a smaller, more narrow lens and say, do you know what? Right now, I just want to know where I am, right? I just want to know where where am I starting from? And that would be sense. If you are already started, you've already got a really great program. Maybe you've got your GDPR compliant. Some of my high flyers, that's what they'll say. I'm GDPR compliant. And that's brilliant because GDPR is a strict standard. But there are some differences, some nuances in PIPA that we need to be aware of. So even if you are GDPR compliant, consider going through the sensing if there's anything that's different and shaping it now so that it fits within your framework and then adapting it. So PIPA is part of your GDPR framework, not isolated because you have a GDPR framework, if that makes sense. It's very important to consider how these legislations and regulations, how they overlap and how they interconnect. And so that's what's really important about that holistic view of the SSA framework. So the next steps we've got, again, as Tahira mentioned, we don't want to leave you empty-handed, right? We want to give you real solutions. And so one of the first next steps is called our PIPA Express. And so just like that train, it's getting you there quite quickly. And so it's a 6-part program where each part covers a key aspect of PIPA compliance. And the entities that we've worked on today with this to date, they have found it very useful for what I call the hybrid approach. And so you get 1 hour of support, of teaching, of guidance. But then you also have activities that you can do within your organization to help you start get things in place. And so PIPA Express is a great program that can be for an organization, tailored to your organization. It can also be offered as a group offering to an industry or a number of entities that would like to work together to meet that goal for January 1st. Of course, we've talked about the SSA framework, and this is a more holistic view. So PIPA Express ticks all the boxes, so to speak, right, for PIPA compliance. But the SSA is how you will be able to really make sure that your program is solid, is robust, is resilient, is agile, no matter what happens, whatever wave comes, you're prepared for it, standing up and jumping. That is what you could think of the SSA framework as, a total package, comprehensive package. So we do offer consulting, coaching, and a whole range of support under the SSA framework. And then last but not least, of course, training is so important. People, a big risk to organizations. So giving them the knowledge, giving them the skill, the empowerment to be able to manage some of this on their own will actually help your organization to minimize lots of the risks that human beings and the mistakes that we make, negligence sometimes, and sometimes ignorance could bring to an organization. And so PIPA for Employees is a course that we offer. It can be instructor-led, as it states, or it can be an online self-study. So as Tahira was, well, actually, as I was talking about SHAPE, you also in training want to think about, does your staff do well with online self-study, or do they do better if it's an in-person, like on Zoom, an instructor-led type of training? It makes no sense investing in online self-study if the team are not savvy or they're not going to stick to it. So be mindful of your decision in terms of your training. We believe that you can create structures with your teams when it comes to privacy and security. At the very top is the privacy officer, which we'll talk about momentarily. But then you could again have leads throughout your business. They can be supervisors, managers that can support the work and the development and the implementation of that privacy program. The champions are your cheerleaders, right? They're the ones who believe in this. They want to be a spokesperson. They want to advocate for data protection, for privacy, for security. And so we do have privacy and security and HR. We have a number of champions, as a matter of fact, that you can do on self-study online on our LMS. And we do offer custom training around these areas as well. If there is a group, a company that wants to train a number of staff members. Again, the leads create that middle phase of having their ear to the ground, leading on the employee awareness. These are the individuals who likely make decisions throughout the organization for different departments. You can consider those individuals for leads. PIPA calls for a privacy representative, but it doesn't hurt. And many entities are actually training more than one individual to serve as privacy officer. Maybe they're the backup deputy privacy officer, or maybe if the individual, the privacy officer is on vacation, you have someone that can pick up. So we do offer our certified and all of these what am I trying to say? All of these training opportunities, they all can offer you great opportunities to add to your resume. I must say to her, I had to smile when I was working at PriveCom and I saw some individuals' resumes with certified privacy officer and other courses they did through TLC. And so you can join the group and take any one of these courses again through our online self-study LMS, or we could offer something more tailored, to individuals and organizations. And then lastly, for individuals who are already trained up as privacy officers, or perhaps you're advanced, you've done some other things. IAPP, I'm a member of IAPP, and so I have an appreciation for those entities as well. They're the next step in our minds when it comes to data protection growth. You can start as a lead, a privacy officer, and then go into doing the CIPI or CIPUM at IAPP. But we do offer advanced PO modules that we will be rolling out. And we have a course that's coming up in October. It's going to cover managing complex access request. Of course, you've got many of them may be simple, but some will be very, very challenging. So we're going to go through some tips, some important tips, and it's very interactive. You'll have an opportunity to work collaboratively and learn from each other. We'll also cover handling cross-border and complex data use, and we will look at AI and ethics integration. All of these, again, we have case studies and activities, interactive activities to help you to really wrap your head around some of those complexities. All of those other areas, we will have courses that will be coming up soon, and they will cover every one of those areas that you see on the screen. Again, our goal is to ensure that individuals at every level have the skills, the knowledge, the awareness for them to protect data and do their part in terms of PIPA compliance. So I'll pass it over to Tahira to take us home now.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thank you all for your attention. I see we've got a couple of chat, looks like maybe some questions in the chat. So we'll take a moment now to go through those. And again, if you do have, to drop off, we are coming up towards the end. But if you do have to drop off, you will be able to contact us on LinkedIn. You can email us solutions@thetlcgroup.pro. And if you've been frantically making notes through this presentation, just a reminder, it will be uploaded to the BEDC's website and YouTube channel. So for some of the notes, you can come back and watch it again. So first question, Siobhan, we've got, does the officer have to reside in Bermuda?
So the officer doesn't have to reside in Bermuda, but often that is a good choice. The reason why is they have to have a good understanding. And actually, let me take that back. It's not necessarily the best choice. It's really how well the individual understands PIPA, the nuances, the complexities, and understands the way the business operates. That's a key area. Will they be responsive and be able to support if there is a data breach? I know in the UK, for data protection officers, often many entities, they do require the individual to reside in the UK. And so under PIPA, it's likely to be the best case for the individual to reside in, to at least have that understanding and that permanent space in Bermuda, where if they need to respond, they can do it in a timely manner.
Okay, thank you. We've got a message that says, are electronic records acceptable? So PIPA does apply to both paper and digital. But if you're talking about recording your sort of documentation, yes, PIPA doesn't say it has to be in any particular format. It just says that, you can be audited, or the privacy commissioner or his team can come to your organization at any time to review, your program. So you can have it electronic if you so desire versus paper, but PIPA applies to all personal data, no matter the format it's in. Okay. Um, Question, Siobhan, I'll pass to you. We've got over 20,000 email addresses that receive bi-weekly newsletters. Oh, you have a really good customer base there.
Very good.
Am I correct that each and every one of them must provide their permission to keep receiving the newsletters?
Well, you'll be happy to know, Mr. Simmons, that PIPA does allow for implied consent. So because they registered already, you could kind of lean on that. Now, should they come to you and say, I don't want it anymore, then you have to stop immediately. But you don't have to put out a huge email to, I mean, from wearing my head, it wouldn't hurt to ask people, but you don't have to do that. It's 20,000 people, of course.
And also on that implied consent, Siobhan, do we want to talk about the grandfather clause? Because that's one that people say, well, gosh, do I have to just get rid of all the data now? That bit about PIPA where it says, as of 1st of January, the data that you have is considered consented. Do you want to just touch on that?
Oh, no, go ahead. You already started, so you can
Okay, all right.
continue.
So again, 1st of January 2025 is full enforcement. So from 1st of January 2025, you need to ensure that your data processing is in line with the legislation. So that's ensuring you've got conditions, you're giving people ways to exercise their rights. The data that you may have collected up until that point under PIPA is considered to be consented. The thing with consent, though, is as quickly as someone can consent, they can withdraw. So you can keep the data. Best practice, again, we're by design and by default advocates, is to try and minimize the amount of personal data that you're collecting. But again, if you don't have the resources to do so, or you don't have the time and ways to dispose of it securely, you can keep it. But the moment that individual says, I do not want you to have my data, you don't have any other condition on the PIPA to keep it, you will have to securely dispose of it. So just to be aware of that as well when it comes to consent. Okay. We've got a bit of a long one here. Does this not blur the lines between what is company data and personal data, and how are decisions ultimately made, whereas the entity is penalized over an individual, such as an internal memo happens to have a person's name on it? Is that company data or personal? Can PIPA override what is considered proprietary information?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm just mindful that it's going over time. So would we like to take this off of this call then?
Sure. I just want to give us one more, just a quick one. Are there templates available for things that should be included in a PIPA policy? I see a number of questions coming in, guys. I
I'm
did
gonna
pop,
give the email, and
yeah, I
they're
did
more
pop
than
it in.
happy. Yeah.
Yes. So if you haven't seen it already in the chat, there is our email, solutions@thetlcgroup.pro. So please contact us if you've got, we haven't been able to answer your question today. And again, if you've got any queries whatsoever, we do again appreciate your time. We do have a survey here. BEDC has a number of questions that they'd like for you to answer about today's webinar. So if you've got your smartphone or something, you could just go ahead and capture the QR code. I believe the link will also be in the email after this webinar as well. So again, we want to ensure that we're being able to provide the information and support that your organization needs for PIPA compliance. And then there's just a couple of other ways you can reach us. We have a website, the tlcgroup.pro, or we have LinkedIn, or you can give us a call. Any final words, Siobhan, before we end today's presentation?
Well, I just want to say again that I'm really excited it's like full circle, right? And just in time for PIPA. I remember again, 2018, we couldn't wait for it to happen. And so we're excited about it. I know not everyone is excited about what's ahead, but we are here to support. And so feel free to get in touch and we can have a chat about how we can support your next steps. And thank you for joining, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.